7 signs you finally defeated a narcissist without even realizing it. When you finally break free from the grip of a narcissist, the signs are not always written on paper or shouted from rooftops, but they are carved deep into the soul and reflected in the way your heart begins to breathe again. It is not just about escaping a person, but about defeating the prison they built around your spirit, your emotions, and even your identity. For so long, you may have felt trapped in their cycle of manipulation, of control, of endless demands for attention, of the constant pressure to prove yourself worthy in their eyes. You lived as if walking on glass, afraid that the smallest misstep would lead to an eruption of anger, a cold silence, or cruel words that shattered your peace. But when you finally defeat such a person, the first thing you feel is that their words no longer control your emotions. Once, a single insult from them could tear you apart, or a sudden silence could keep you awake all night questioning your worth. But now, their silence feels empty, and their insults fall like rain on stone. You do not absorb their poison anymore. Their voice that once held power over your peace now sounds hollow, because you have learned that their words were never a reflection of your truth, but only a projection of their own brokenness. That is the moment you realize you are free. There comes a time when you stand in front of the mirror and you no longer see the person they convinced you to be, weak and dependent, desperate for scraps of affection. Instead, you see someone who has rediscovered dignity, someone who no longer needs their approval to feel worthy. In the past, you may have looked at yourself and thought, "Am I good enough for them? Am I doing enough to please them?" But today, you smile because you know you are enough exactly as you are. Your worth is no longer tied to their mood swings or their unpredictable reactions. You have reconnected with the truth that you were created with purpose, with value, with honor that no human being can strip away. That is another sign you have defeated them, because the chains of their validation no longer bind you. The air around you feels different when you are no longer carrying the weight of constant conflict. Living with a narcissist is like being caught in a storm that never ends. Every day there is a battle, whether it is about their anger, their blame, or their unending hunger for control. But when you finally step out of their storm, the silence feels different. It is not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. Your heart is not racing anymore. Your mind is not filled with rehearsed defenses for accusations that never came from truth. Instead, you feel calm. You sit in your home, or you walk through your day, and you realize you are no longer drained by the games. You do not wake up bracing yourself for another battle. You do not go to sleep fearing what tomorrow will bring. That inner peace is proof that you have won. One of the most powerful transformations happens when you stop explaining yourself. Narcissists thrive on making you defend every action, every word, every choice. They twist your reality until you feel the need to justify even your existence. But when you defeat them, that urge to defend yourself dies. You realize you do not need to convince them of your truth, because truth does not require their acceptance. You live honestly, and you stop wasting your breath on those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Your life is no longer a courtroom where they are the judge and you are the defendant. You walk away, and in that silence lies your greatest victory. And then comes a sign that surprises you with its clarity. Their absence no longer feels like loss. Once the idea of losing them felt terrifying. They had conditioned you to believe that you could not survive without them, that your life would collapse if they walked away. But now, when they are gone, you feel light, as though a weight has been lifted off your chest. You breathe deeper, you smile easier, you feel freedom in their absence. You do not miss the chaos, you do not crave the drama, and you no longer mistake their attention for love. You realize that what you thought was companionship was actually captivity. Their absence does not hurt you, it heals you. Perhaps the greatest victory of all is spiritual, because through the struggle, through the pain, through the tears shed in silence, you found yourself turning closer to your Creator. Every wound they left on your heart became a reason to call upon Him. Every humiliation pushed you to seek dignity in His words. Every moment you felt unloved drew you closer to the one whose love never fails. And slowly you realized that the very storm they tried to drown you in became the reason you built a stronger boat. You became wiser, stronger, more patient, more compassionate, and more rooted in your faith. Their cruelty taught you the sweetness of mercy. Their lies taught you the beauty of truth. Their betrayal taught you the value of loyalty, and their attempts to break you only pushed you to rise higher. Defeating a narcissist is not about revenge, nor is it about proving them wrong. It is about reclaiming yourself. It is about waking up and realizing you are no longer chained to their toxic cycle. It is about no longer feeling the need to shrink so they can shine. It is about no longer being afraid of their anger, their manipulation, or their silence. It is about finally saying, I am enough. I am free. I am whole. It is about recognizing that the greatest victory is not making them suffer, but making yourself flourish. They wanted to drain you, but you learned how to pour into yourself. They wanted to define you, but you wrote your own definition. They wanted to break you, but instead you broke free. Every scar they left is now a reminder of your strength. Every tear shed is now a testimony of your resilience. Every prayer whispered in the darkness has been answered with light. You no longer walk with the weight of their shadow over your life. Instead, you walk with your head high, your heart light, and your spirit unbroken. That is the undeniable sign that you have finally defeated them. Not because they are gone, but because their presence no longer has power. Not because they have changed, but because you have. And that is the greatest victory of all. You no longer feel controlled by their words or silence. And that is when you know something within you has shifted forever. Once upon a time, their voice carried power over you in ways you could hardly understand. A simple phrase from their mouth could pierce deeper than a knife, making you question your worth, your decisions, and even your very existence. Their criticism would echo in your mind long after it was spoken, and their silence would wrap around you like chains, leaving you restless, anxious, and desperate for answers that never came. You would lie awake replaying their words, wondering if you should have spoken differently, wondering if you should have done more to please them, wondering why they chose to withhold affection and communication, as if love were a reward you had to earn. Their silence was not empty. It was heavy, manipulative, and designed to make you feel small. It was the kind of silence that forced you into overthinking, apologizing, and begging for peace just so you could breathe again. For so long, you allowed them to play the role of master over your emotions, rising and falling according to their moods, their approval, and their attention. But when you finally break free from that invisible cage, their words lose their power. The insults that once stung you so deeply now sound like noise in the distance. You hear them, but they no longer sink into your heart. They no longer shake your confidence or make you doubt yourself. Instead, you recognize them for what they are: tools of manipulation, reflections of their own insecurities, weapons they once used to dominate your spirit. You realize that you are no longer defined by what they say or do not say. If they call you names, you know those names are not yours to carry. If they accuse you falsely, you do not feel the need to bow down and defend yourself against lies. If they choose silence, you no longer panic, because you understand that their silence is not a measure of your worth, but a tactic to control what cannot be controlled anymore. This transformation happens slowly. But when it does, it feels like the breaking of chains. You no longer live in reaction to their moods. You no longer chase their validation. You no longer tremble at their silence. Instead, you live from a place of inner strength that no one can take away from you. Their words that once made you feel unworthy now remind you of how far you have come. Because you know that if their opinion was once your prison, your freedom came the moment you stopped believing them. Their silence, which once terrified you, now feels meaningless, because you understand that silence cannot define you when you are already secure in your truth. You look at them and realize that their power was never real. It was only the power you allowed them to have. Now that permission has been revoked, and you stand tall, untouched by their words, unshaken by their silence. Your self-worth shines without their approval. And that is when you know you have taken back what was always yours, but what they tried so hard to strip away. When you were under their influence, your value felt like it lived in their hands, and every smile or frown from them became a verdict about your existence. If they praised you, you felt alive. If they criticized you, you felt crushed. You adjusted your life like a mirror, reflecting only what they wanted to see, afraid that if you ever showed your true self, it would not be enough. You measured your worth by their moods, their words, and their fleeting attention, never realizing that this cycle was designed to keep you dependent, to keep you small, to keep you believing that without their approval you had no identity of your own. You gave so much of yourself away that you almost forgot what it meant to love who you are without needing someone to confirm it. But the moment comes when the veil is lifted and you realize that your worth is not a prize to be handed out by another human being. You discover that you were created with value long before they entered your life, and no amount of rejection or belittling can erase what was written into your soul. This awakening is not sudden. It is born out of exhaustion, out of the constant cycle of trying to please someone who could never be pleased. One day you look into the mirror, and you no longer ask yourself whether you are enough for them. Instead, you ask if they were ever worthy of the effort you gave, and the answer comes with clarity. You see yourself as more than their judgments, more than their criticisms, more than their shifting standards. You learn to stand tall even when no one claps for you, to smile even when no one praises you, to be at peace even when no one notices your worth. Your self-worth begins to glow in the choices you make. You no longer chase after people who refuse to value you. You no longer break yourself to fit into someone else's idea of perfection. You start saying no when your heart feels burdened, and you stop apologizing for existing in the way you were meant to exist. You find joy in your own growth, in your own company, in the quiet realization that you are valuable not because someone says so, but because you were created with purpose. Their approval becomes irrelevant, their disapproval powerless, their silence meaningless. You do not wait for their nod to feel whole, and you do not fear their rejection to feel broken. The light within you begins to shine without interruption, steady and unwavering, because it no longer depends on their recognition. It is fueled by truth, by faith, by self-acceptance, and by the knowledge that your worth is yours alone. Unshakable and untouchable peace replaces constant conflict, and that is when the atmosphere of your life begins to change in a way you never thought possible. When you are entangled with someone who thrived on chaos, arguments and misunderstandings were your daily bread. Even on days that seemed calm, you felt like you were walking on thin ice, waiting for the moment it would crack beneath your feet. A small word could ignite a storm, a forgotten detail could spark a fight, and even silence could be twisted into an accusation. Your life became a battlefield where you were always on the defensive, always preparing for an attack, always drained by the effort it took just to survive their moods and demands. The constant conflict left no room for peace, and your heart forgot what stillness felt like. Nights were restless, mornings were heavy, and days blurred into a cycle of tension that never seemed to end. But when you finally free yourself from their grip, the noise begins to fade. The shouting in your ears, the criticisms that once pierced your heart, the endless debates designed not to resolve but to dominate, all begin to lose their place in your life. Slowly, peace starts to settle in, not as something temporary or fragile, but as a steady rhythm that your heart learns to trust again. You wake up in the morning without dread. You go to bed without rehearsing arguments in your head. You begin to notice the beauty in quiet moments, the kind of silence that is not heavy with punishment, but filled with calm. The absence of their chaos does not leave emptiness. It leaves space for peace to breathe. You start to understand that peace is not simply the absence of shouting, but the presence of clarity and balance. You are no longer trapped in cycles of defending yourself, proving yourself, or trying to untangle lies and manipulations. You are free to speak without fear, to breathe without tension, to exist without bracing yourself for the next attack. In this peace you discover who you truly are beneath the layers of anxiety they created. You find joy in small things that once felt insignificant. You laugh without the fear that your laughter will be mocked. You sit in silence without worrying that your quiet will be misinterpreted. You make decisions without expecting them to turn into wars. This peace is not loud or dramatic. It is gentle but powerful, steady but transformative. It teaches you that life does not have to be lived in constant conflict, that love is not supposed to hurt, that companionship is not meant to drain. The calm you carry now becomes your shield, and even when reminders of the past try to creep back in, the peace you have built is stronger than the storms you survive. It replaces the chaos entirely, turning what was once a battlefield into a sanctuary where your soul can finally rest. You've stopped explaining yourself to them, and that is one of the clearest signs that you have broken free from the cycle of control they once held over you. For so long, you felt the need to defend every decision, every word, every silence. They conditioned you to believe that you owed them endless explanations, that your truth was never enough unless it was justified to their satisfaction. They questioned your intentions, twisted your actions, and demanded reasons for things that required none. You found yourself rehearsing conversations in your head, preparing arguments for battles that were never fair, always trying to prove that you were not guilty of the accusations they threw your way. Every explanation you gave was never truly heard because they were not seeking understanding. They were seeking dominance. They thrived on watching you bend under the weight of their constant interrogation, and they fed on the insecurity that grew inside you each time you felt your voice was not enough. But when you finally reclaim your strength, something shifts within you. You begin to see the futility of justifying yourself to someone who has already made up their mind to misunderstand you. You recognize that no explanation will ever satisfy them, because their purpose was never clarity. It was control. And so, you stop. You stop over-explaining where you have been, why you said what you said, why you did what you did. You stop handing over your peace in exchange for a false sense of closure that never comes. You realize that your truth stands whether they acknowledge it or not, and you no longer feel the urge to convince them of who you are. This silence you choose is not weakness, it is power. It is the power of understanding that your life is not a courtroom and they are not your judge. You walk away from their demands for justification, and in doing so, you strip them of the control they once enjoyed. Their attempts to provoke explanations fall flat because you no longer respond. Their accusations no longer spark endless debates because you no longer participate. You live with a sense of freedom that does not require their approval or agreement. Your actions come from integrity, not from fear of being questioned. Your words flow with honesty, not with the weight of having to defend every syllable. In this newfound strength, you learn that silence can be louder than any argument. It is the silence of confidence, of refusing to play a game that was never meant for you to win. You no longer spend your energy proving your innocence to someone who delights in seeing you drained. Instead, you conserve your energy for growth. For building a life where your voice is valued and your truth is honored. The moment you stop explaining yourself to them, you step into a freedom they can no longer touch, a freedom that belongs to you and cannot be taken back. Their absence feels like freedom, not loss, and that is when you finally realize that what you once thought was love was actually a cage. In the beginning, their presence may have seemed comforting, even intoxicating, as though you needed them to breathe, to feel seen, to feel alive. They conditioned you to believe that without them, you were incomplete, that their attention was the air that sustained you. So when they withdrew, when they withheld affection or disappeared into their silence, you panicked. You felt abandoned, desperate to win them back, desperate to do anything just to restore the sense of stability they dangled like a reward. Their absence at that time felt like a deep void, a sharp ache that convinced you that losing them would mean losing yourself. You mourned the idea of them even when they were standing beside you, because their approval and presence had become the currency of your worth. But the truth has a way of shining through the cracks, and over time you began to see that what you were holding on to was not love, it was control. The love they offered came with conditions, with manipulation, with endless cycles of chaos. The attachment you felt was not to a person who nourished you, but to a system that drained you. When you finally step out of that cycle and see their absence for what it is, you recognize that you are not losing anything of value. Instead, you are gaining something far greater, your freedom. The silence they leave behind is no longer heavy with punishment. It is filled with relief. The space they no longer occupy becomes fertile ground for your healing, your growth, and your rediscovery of joy. Their absence does not leave you empty, it allows you to breathe. You begin to notice the stillness in your heart, the lightness in your step, the clarity in your mind. You no longer wake up with dread, wondering how their mood will dictate your day. You no longer shrink yourself to avoid conflict, or rehearse excuses to pacify their endless demands. Their absence is no longer a wound. It is a doorway. It opens you to the possibility of peace, of building a life where you are no longer bound to the unpredictability of someone else's chaos. It teaches you that solitude is not loneliness. It is freedom, With every passing day, you feel lighter without them. You discover hobbies, passions, and parts of yourself that were buried under the weight of their shadow. You find joy in laughter that is no longer silenced by criticism, in friendships that are no longer threatened by jealousy, in moments of stillness that are no longer interrupted by drama. Their absence becomes proof that you were never meant to depend on them for happiness, because happiness was waiting for you on the other side of letting go. And when you finally embrace this truth, you understand that their absence is not something to grieve, but something to celebrate, because it is the clearest sign that you are free. At last you've grown closer to your Creator through the struggle. And that is perhaps the most powerful sign that what was meant to destroy you has instead elevated you. When you were in the midst of the turmoil, when every day felt like a battle for your peace, and every night was filled with questions and tears, you felt the weight of isolation pressing down on your soul. Yet in those moments when no human voice could comfort you, you turned your face toward the one who never leaves. You whispered prayers in the silence of the night, sometimes not even knowing what words to use, only pouring your heart out in raw honesty. In that vulnerability, you found a closeness that you had never experienced before. The pain became a bridge that carried you toward the embrace of your Creator, and the wounds that narcissistic cruelty left behind became reminders to seek healing in the one who holds all hearts in his hand. Through the struggle, you began to recognize that no amount of human approval or affection could ever replace the sweetness of divine love. Every time you were belittled, you found yourself reaching for the words of your Creator that reminded you of your worth. Every time you were made to feel unworthy, you discovered verses and prayers that lifted you higher than their insults ever could. The more they tried to strip away your dignity, the more you realized that your dignity was never in their hands to begin with. It was granted to you by the one who fashioned you with purpose and honor. Their rejection became a lesson that acceptance from people is fleeting, but acceptance from your Creator is eternal. The struggle also taught you patience, because you learned to endure without breaking. It taught you humility, because you realized how deeply you needed divine strength to carry you through. It taught you resilience, because even in your weakest moments you discovered that faith could anchor you in ways that no human promise ever could. Every tear you shed became a form of worship, every silent cry a prayer, every wound a testimony that you were being reshaped, refined, and strengthened by the very pain that was meant to break you. And as you grew closer to your Creator, your perspective shifted. You no longer saw the struggle as pure suffering, but as a path that led you to rediscover who truly sustains you. The person who tried to control you inadvertently pushed you into the arms of the one who frees you. The darkness they created in your life made you appreciate the light of divine guidance even more. You began to trust more deeply, to surrender more fully, to believe with certainty that no cruelty can erase the mercy of the one who watches over you. What was once a season of pain has become the very reason your heart now beats with a deeper connection. And through it all, you have found strength in faith that no one can ever take away.